Hey again, everybody, and welcome to the Experience Maker Show. This is Dan Gingiss, customer experience speaker and coach. So happy to be here with you Thursday and every Thursday. Really appreciate you joining in. Every week, I try to bring somebody on the show who can share some knowledge bombs about something having to do with customer experience. And today is no exception. I got to meet Scott Luton on a panel that I participated on for our friends at SAP Customer Experience. We had a great time, and one of the things I learned really quickly was I didn't really know a whole lot about supply chain, but man, does that have a huge impact on the customer experience. It's not something necessarily that customers think about, but when they go to the store and their favorite product is not on the shelf, that's a supply chain issue. And Scott is one of the foremost leaders on supply chain. He is the founder and CEO and host of Supply Chain Now, a great guy. And as I mentioned on my LinkedIn post, one of the things that I really like about Scott is that he speaks our language. So if you are thinking to yourself, I don't know anything about supply chain, I'm going to be really confused, Scott's going to help you learn it because he speaks in a very practical and straightforward way. So, Scott, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, good afternoon and happy International Lego Day.
Oh, outstanding. I didn't know, but that's wonderful.
So 1958, the patent for Legos, which my son is a huge fan of, was filed, and the rest is history. So Lego is incredible. Talking about making your customers happy, right?
Outstanding. Yeah, for sure. We've talked about Lego a couple times on my podcast, Experience This, and some of the small things that they do to keep people engaged, even things like, not spoiling the surprise when they ship you boxes in the mail, right? And they use a kind of a brown box so that you don't know what's inside. Anyway, Scott, tell us about you and who you are, and what is this whole supply chain business? Why should we care about this?
Well, I really appreciate that. And one of the silver linings here that comes out of the pandemic, which has been such a tough time for everybody, is the additional recognition of the supply chain, the workforce, and all the folks and organizations and entities that keep things moving, right? Keep the economy moving ahead and make sure consumers have what they need, because that demand only gets higher and higher. So, the global supply chain makes sure that we get what we need, and we can go into the stores, as you mentioned, and get things off shelves, or in the ever burgeoning e-commerce space, which a lot of folks are saying, let's just drop the E. It's commerce, right? It's commerce here and now and moving ahead. But, e-commerce is exploding, and there's a very vast supply chain behind e-commerce and making sure folks, to your point, can get those wrapped confidential Legos, 2 days later at the price they want.
Exactly. And tell us a little bit about Supply Chain Now. I noticed you say you are the co-founder, CEO, and host.
Yeah, so we launched Supply Chain Now a few years back, all about serving as a voice of the global supply chain industry, right? You're really giving light and some conversations on the issues impacting not just supply chain, but really global business. And via live streams or podcasts or special events, you name it, it's all about giving industry that voice, the best practices, the critical issues of the day, the people that make it happen, the technologies, of course, that make it happen, that all roll up into really these days what is an information supply chain.
Awesome. That's really cool. Now, you mentioned the pandemic, and you mentioned that certainly supply chain has become more of a focus, as has customer experience, I think, during that time. Let's talk about two things that seem to be on people's minds or on companies' minds that have definitely been affected. The first are computer chips, and the second is PPE, or personalized protective equipment. Tell us what's going on and why we're seeing a crunch there.
Yeah, sure. I think if I can back up a second, because do you remember the movie from the 1980s, Spaceballs?
Sure do.
That movie is a spoof on Star Wars, right? And there's a scene in there where whoever is playing the Darth Vader-esque character, there's a scene where they've got to chase after who they're chasing after, and they ask, "Hey, should we move to light speed?" And he goes, "No, ludicrous speed, and there's a big gasp. And, that scene is playing out not just across supply chain, but across business. Digital transformation. I mentioned the information supply chain. That is very real. And, I think we were both at NRF, the big show, which is a wonderful talk about market intel. Walmart, which has been fascinating to watch their transformation as they continue to get better and better at competing against all the other players there, especially, of course, Amazon. Their chief customer officer, let's see here, Janie Whiteside, said that, quote, "We've witnessed 5-year digital transformation in 5 weeks," end quote. You think about what that does in general. You think about what that does in global business, but then think about the supply chain community, which has already been moving so fast. Then there's a ton of change because of how consumer preferences are changing and demands are changing. Who'd have thought we were talking about toilet paper as much as we have? But that demand is so historical, 500, 600% over what's normal. It's huge ripple effect throughout supply chains that consumers have felt at oftentimes. So that's a little bit of backdrop. This digital transformation has really been shaping the supply chain community, the business community, but specifically computer chips. So let's think about demand for a second. What do you think? What's one big factor that you would think really impacts demand for semiconductors?
Let's go with smartphones.
Sure, absolutely. Smartphones. What devices aren't becoming smart these days, right? I think they're putting.
Yeah, they shouldn't have said phones. Yeah,
right. They're not only in our phones, but certainly in our automobiles, computer chips. They are electric vehicles, right? In our refrigerators, right? In our vacuums, everything, the Internet of Things. Well, that's requiring so much digitalization of what goes into these products. The demand for computer chips has really taken off. In fact, so much so that there's been a couple automotive companies that have had to shut down production lines and stagger back production because they can't get their hands on computer chips. So that's a couple things there. I am by no means a semiconductor expert. I understand there's one other thing that's impacting computer chip demand. That's this notion of ambient computing. So, the Alexa device, we've got a couple here. Do you have one of those in your home?
I do. You probably just turned her on.
So people much smarter than me. I stole this from my friend Kevin L. Jackson, was talking to me about this notion of ambient computing. So ambient computing, these things are always on. They're always listening. And it change, and the technology goes into those things are changing. And also they're getting smaller and smaller. So companies that have like Intel has been one of the world's largest producer for a long time. And they have been undergoing some challenges, especially related to production, especially related as the demand for smaller devices. We're talking 7 nanometers big on these computer chips. It's incredibly difficult.
I'm guessing that's pretty small.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not really knowing what a nanometer is, but I think I can put it together.
Yeah, it's very tiny. Think about all the manufacturing complexity that goes into making something that small. That's got to be that high performance. So, tons of factors going into computer chips. I think that we got to keep, with Intel, they brought on a new CEO that's an engineer. Some of the headlines read, "Engineers are back in control at Intel." We'll see. I think Intel really is a barometer in that space, and as everything gets smarter and smarter, we'll see how the industry steps up to meet that demand and make sure there's enough supply that goes into all these smart devices that we all take advantage of every day.
So I want to take this back to the customer experience piece. And I've written about this before, that sometimes as companies, our experience is dependent on other people or other organizations that are sometimes out of our control. And one of my favorite examples is a baseball team, right? The team is in control of everything that happens in the stadium, the food and the seating and the lighting and all that sort of stuff. But they're not in control of the weather, and they're not in control of whether the team plays well that day. Similarly, now you've got companies that, this supply chain aspect, whether it's a computer chip or something else, is often out of their control. So let's say you're a company now, let's say you're a car company and you're shutting down manufacturing. What is it that you now have to tell customers, and how do you explain this to them when, the word supply chain sort of cause their eyes to glaze over, and they're just looking to you, the car company, to have the product in stock, right? They don't really care about your back end problems. So how do we communicate this to customers, especially during a crisis when it's out of our control, and yet we're doing everything we can to try to fix it?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question and a very timely question. Many companies are answering that question out of necessity, day in and day out. I think two things for me come to mind, and it goes back to my days of, working in supply chain, working in manufacturing, where I've had to let customers know, hey, those parts, they're going to be late, and there's two things I always use. I think number one, got to be transparent and honest, right? And really answer questions. Don't hide anything. No smoke and mirrors. I think that's so important. We all know how important trust is to brands these days. And then secondly, make sure you've got a working knowledge of what the root cause is, right? Give them a intuitive business case for why you can't get what you were supposed to get on whatever day at whatever price, and better yet, when they can expect it. Walk them through that story where really it makes sense. I think that helps trust, and it helps them know that it's not just an excuse, but hey, this really happened, and a lot of it's out of our hands, but we're working hard for you, Mr. and Miss Customer, to make sure you're taken care of.
Yeah, I think as with anything, it's about communication, and customers generally are understanding when you are upfront and honest and communicate in a genuine way with them. Especially, I think during the pandemic, people realized, hey, companies are going through tough times. They're doing the best that they can. So I do think communication is absolutely key. If you're out of stock on something and your e-commerce site, or your commerce site, as Scott might call it, don't just say out of stock. Give a little bit more information. Why is it out of stock? When might it be back in stock? Give us some sense that you're working on it. And I think that customers will be much more forgiving. Now,
along these lines, Dan, the last few months, we all probably have experienced different challenges of getting stuff we needed. The spare parts industry, we had a dishwasher go down, and we needed a couple of really inexpensive spare parts. It was next to impossible. It was a month and a half later without being able to use the dishwasher, which first world problem, but for 3 kids, those dishes were stacking up. But really, understanding where those parts are coming from, and sometimes companies and the customer care agents or what have you, customer service, sometimes they're not well versed in how the supply chain is going to deliver on the order. And so I found myself in a couple of those cases really trying to get to, okay, what's the problem, and where's the miscommunication? All right, getting that root cause is so important. Some of the best companies, B&H, we get a lot of stuff from B&H. Don't you love chat sessions where stuff gets done, right? You get to the problem, or they help you answer a technical question, or better yet, they find that order, or they help you process that return. And it just makes things so much easier. So I think, one of the best practices I've certainly seen in recent days is companies that really train their customer service agents or representatives on how to really problem solve and make sure, to your point, they communicate what's going on honestly and to the point to the customer.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. I'm going to shift us a little bit and tell you a quick story about my first job out of college, where I worked for a collectibles company, the Danbury Mint. We did plates, dolls, figurines. I happened to work on sports collectibles. And one of the things that they did to one lucky new employee every year, and it just happened to be me, was they put us in charge of the freight forwarding and the relationships with the freight forwarders. And so I got a very quick education on container shipping and all this stuff all this operational stuff that frankly was really interesting, but I kind of didn't ask for. And then for some reason, I don't know why, probably because I was good at it, but they had me keep that for almost all 4 years that I worked there. It was supposed to change every year, but I got to hang on to it. My point here is that I've been made aware recently and definitely been hearing from some of my clients about some issues right now with containers, and containers either not arriving or delayed, and by the way, just for everybody else, when we talk about a container, basically think of think of a 16-wheeler on the highway. It's that box that sits on top of the chassis. That's a container, and the container comes over in a ship, usually stacked, super high. You wonder how these things make it across and things don't fall into the water. And then those containers get put on trucks, and the trucks get delivered to a warehouse. What I've been hearing is that there are cases now where companies are being charged double what it would normally be to get a container shipped with any amount of speed, or basically being told, hey, you're going to be skipped over in favor of the ones that are willing to pay. What's going on there, and how should companies prepare for potentially another crunch?
Excellent. And if I can add to your story too, that the containers weren't always in place. Malcolm McLean was a freight shipping business person that back in the 50s said there's got to be a better way. We can't always pick up piece by piece as we're offloading ships. So he came up with the notion of standardizing 20-foot and 40-foot containers, to your point. I love that story. But nevertheless, there's so much more there. There's two things that we've been tracking here lately and have heard a lot about lately. I think one of them is just, it goes back to demand, like so much does with supply chain, right? Because demand is your North Star, right? The demand has been so much, especially driven by e-commerce, especially driven by the replenishment of inventories, which took hits based on pandemic and some of those core things we're looking to get our hands on. So the demand for ocean shipping is off the charts, right? That is putting a lot of pressure on maxing out these massive cargo ships, stacking these containers up really high. Well, get this. So according to the World Shipping Council, between 2008 and 2019, an average of 1,382 containers were lost each year, 12 months, just 1,300 containers. Here in the first month.
Do you mean like they fell off the ship or what?
Yeah, most of the time. Yeah, I'm sure there's other incidents, but they're lost, unaccounted for, insurance claims were filed, you name it, 1,300.
Okay.
Here in the first month of 2021, again, one of the reasons is they're stacking so high to demand. Over 4,000 containers have been lost in less than 1 month.
Wow.
One of those claims was over $200 million in insurance. So you think about some of those factors that are really elevating shipping costs. That's certainly chief amongst them. The second issue we're tracking, we're going to have to get a global trade expert to come in and really dissect the trade war going on between China and U.S. But a lot of empty vessels, right? When they come over to a port, whether it's a port of Long Beach or maybe on the East Coast in Savannah, which is a really busy port, instead of loading up those ships and fulfilling demand going back the other way, a lot of those vessels are going back empty to China due to some internal. Well, I'll leave that to the experts, trade experts, the pressures that the China government can put on some of the shipping. But that really is preventing that demand, and those it's causing empty miles, right? Empty miles, yeah. and it's really setting back our efforts at really catching up to the demand. So huge demand, stacking up these container ships, causing to accidents and leading to unfulfilled orders. And number two, not maximizing these long voyages, right? Sailings, which is highly inefficient, and sadly it's an outcome with this trade war that's taking place.
Well, yeah, I mean, we forget about the fact that so many American companies make a lot of their money on exports, and so they have to get this material overseas to other countries to sell. And much as we are bringing in items from other countries as well. Yeah, I mean, this is not a political show, and I'm not sure I want to get into trade wars, but I will say one of the things that made me most aware of, at least, let's say, trade imbalance was a few years ago when I went to Tokyo. And the first thing that I noticed, I loved being there, and Japan was wonderful, but the first thing I noticed is there were no American cars on the road. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. On our roads, all there are Japanese cars, and yet there was almost no American cars on the Japanese roads. And that was the sort of the first reality check for me of like, when they talk about trade imbalance, it's sometimes a concept that's hard to grasp, but that one made it a lot clearer to me, as cars seem to be going in one direction only, and that doesn't seem exactly right. So very interesting. I think companies are certainly feeling the pinch in the United States in terms of trying to bring things in. I know one of my clients is trying to bring in more PPE, and it's getting stuck, or they're having to pay a whole lot more. to bring it in. And of course, that cost gets passed on to the end user, and the end user is unhappy because gloves or masks that they were paying, cents for, they're now paying dollars for, and it's a really big difference. And not only is it more expensive, but we need more of them because of what's going on and having to change them out more often and all that sort of thing. So really interesting stuff. And I think on the export side, I hadn't thought so much about the export side, but also really important if that's a big part of your business. We're getting some awesome comments online on LinkedIn and Twitter. Really appreciate everybody watching. If you do have a question for Scott, please post it in the next minute or so before we wrap up, and I'll be happy to post your question.
Only
Scott,
easy, only softballs, please.
Yeah, okay. So, thank you for a great segue, because you just mentioned softball, which is very much related to baseball. And you suggested that I mention Hank Aaron to you, which I would love to do. I posted on LinkedIn last week when he passed that, there are legends and then there are legends. And I think it's hard to find a bigger legend, at least in our lifetime, both in the sports world and off the field, than Hank Aaron. So tell me why you wanted me to bring him up in this discussion.
Yeah, excellent. I appreciate that. Sports are such a powerful way of helping to drive change in society, right? And that's been pointed out to me a couple of times, and I thought that's a very wonderful way of looking at sports the right way, beyond the wins and losses. And Hank Aaron was one of those figures that beyond the incredible records on the field, what he did in society, building bridges, and what he overcame. His Hank Aaron hopefully will be on the lips and the minds of sports fans for generations to come. And we've got to do some things to make sure that happens, right? We don't, as an Atlanta Braves fan, there's been a move to change the name to the Atlanta Hammers. There's a great petition circulating online to make that change. I love that idea.
Yeah, I do too.
We're adamant about, hey, let's make it Hank Aaron Field, so that as folks plan their logistics to get out to a game, it's coming out to Hank Aaron Field, right, where it's on. Really, it brings his presence front and center. And we're talking about who a player who broke the color barrier in the South Atlantic League, right? Jackie Robinson, of course, broke it. First one to break it in major leagues, but Hank Aaron heard Jackie Robinson speak when he was a young teenager, and that's what prompted him to want to play professional baseball and to go on and do the things he did. And if that doesn't make it so important that we've got to make sure folks know, and our kids and their kids know the Hank Aaron story, how he had to hide from the KKK as a kid. He's written about and testified about time and time again under his bed because they were parading through his town in Mobile, Alabama. Overcome all of that to rise to becoming a huge ambassador for bridging the massive divides in society. And we still have plenty of work that needs to be done, as you and I both know. But man, the shoulders of giants like Hank Aaron, we've got to make sure, it's our duty to make sure folks know about what number 44 did on the field and off the field.
Yeah, very well said. And, I think one additional point is obviously Hank Aaron was known for breaking baseball's probably most sacred record, the home run record. And of course, taking it away from the ultimate white male, Babe Ruth, probably the biggest name in baseball history. And I think that's unfortunately what led to a lot of the hatred towards him, which obviously was unfounded. But this guy was not only, the elite of the elite in terms of professional baseball players, but as you said, spent decades in the Atlanta Braves organization and within Major League Baseball as a member of society, trying to make society better and trying to help people learn from what he went through, trying to help new players. I've read that he was such a mentor to so many new players coming into the league, teaching them how to deal with all the publicity and all that. And yeah, there's very few. I think the term now is generational talent, is what we might say of a prospect. And certainly Hank Aaron was a generational talent, one that may never be matched, but certainly, as you very well said, should never be forgotten. So I love the idea of the team name. I think it kind of solves two problems at the same time.
Right.
I know Major League Baseball is going to do a lot. I think he's deserving, as Jackie Robinson was, of having his number retired throughout baseball. That does affect a couple players that I know, but I think that might be a good idea as well. And all good stuff. So thank you for bringing that topic up. Love it. And Scott, always a pleasure to talk with you. I learn something every time I talk with you, and I'm really glad that you've brought supply chain to the masses, if you will. I know that your core audience are people that are in supply chain, but you and I have crossed paths now enough times that I know that you're helping other people understand what is a complex part of business that, frankly, if you've been in marketing or customer service, maybe you haven't really spent a lot of time learning about, but as hopefully we've shared today, it is a critical part of the end experience. And it is one of those pieces that when it works, nobody thinks about it. When it doesn't work, everybody's attention is on it.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the kind words. I love your storytelling. That's what we do. At the heart of it is telling the stories of the practitioners, of the folks out there, the companies out there, the teams of technologies that are working so hard to protect the psyche of the rest of us as consumers. And they don't get enough attention. And that's really important. But I got to tell you, Dan, I've stolen a couple of your best practices. I really enjoy your interactions. I'm really excited about this. One of the big projects you've got coming out with this new book. I can't wait to get my hands on that. And it's always a pleasure. You bet. It's always a pleasure to connect with you. And we look forward to having you on one of our upcoming live streams as well.
Awesome. I would be glad to. And thank you. And before you go, how can our listeners contact you, or how do they get in touch?
Easy, two ways. You can go to supplychainnow.com. It's just that easy. Or you can look us up, Supply Chain Now, wherever you get your podcasts from. We do offer a money back guarantee. I'm kidding. It's free to subscribe. And as we joke a lot, the weather. I think the weather, whether it's in Georgia or wherever, if you don't like the weather, give it a day. Well, hey, if you don't like the story we covered today, give it a day and tune in the next day. But Supply Chain Now, wherever you get your podcasts from.
Awesome. Definitely tune in, everybody. Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate it. Great to see you. And thank you again to our audience for tuning in every week to the Experience Maker Show. It is now available as a podcast. So if you don't have time to watch the video live or watch it on YouTube as a recording, you can now catch it on your favorite podcast app and listen to it instead. So search up the Experience Maker. Awesome to have Scott here today. Next week, we're going to have another great guest. It is Gabe Larson. Now, you may remember that I promoted Gabe Larson appearing on the show a couple weeks ago. He had a last-minute schedule change, and we had A. Lee Judge instead, who was awesome. So Gabe is going to return next week. He is the vice president of marketing for a company called Customer with a K. It is a customer service platform that puts the customer at the center. Looking forward to talking with Gabe next week. I'm Dan Gingiss, customer experience speaker and coach. You can reach me at dangingiss.com. I'd love to work with you and your company to help create remarkable experiences that your customers can't wait to share. Thanks so much for joining me. We'll see you next week and every Thursday on the Experience Maker Show. Enjoy the rest of your week and have a terrific weekend.